By the time I was 26, I had paid off every dollar of my student loans, bought a condo in Denver outright, and was running a software consulting business that cleared $380,000 last year. I did it without a single check from my parents. Not a loan, not a gift, not even a cosign on my first apartment lease because they refused. I want you to understand that before I tell you what they did next, my younger brother was always the one they believed in. He was the athlete, the charmer, the one who could walk into a room and make my dad stand up straighter with pride. I was the quiet one, the one who spent weekends coding in my bedroom instead of going to his soccer games. My mom used to say I was hard to connect with. What she meant was I didn't need much from them, so they gave me nothing and saved everything for him. When he decided to get an MBA from a private school in Boston, my parents didn't blink. They pulled money from their retirement savings, took out a second mortgage, and told everyone at church they were investing in their son's future. $160,000 over 2 years. I know the exact number because my dad told me at Thanksgiving dinner, the same dinner where he said, without looking up from his plate, that he hoped I understood how lucky I was to be self-sufficient. I was 23 then. I had just landed my first big contract. I smiled and passed the gravy. My brother graduated with his MBA and couldn't find a job. Not for lack of trying, I think. The market was brutal that year. But the degree he chose was expensive and narrow, and the companies he wanted weren't hiring. 6 months turned into a year. My parents started covering his rent in Boston, then his car payment, then his credit card minimum. I watched this happen from a distance because I had built a life in Denver that had nothing to do with any of them. I called my mom on her birthday. I sent my dad a card on Father's Day. That was the shape of our relationship, and I had accepted it. Then, 14 months ago, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, an actual letter printed on stiff white paper from an attorney's office in my hometown in Ohio. I stood in my kitchen in my work clothes and read it 3 times because I was sure I was misunderstanding something. I was not misunderstanding anything. My parents were formally demanding reimbursement for the cost of raising me. The letter itemized it, 18 years of expenses. Food, housing, clothing, school supplies, extracurricular activities, medical costs, totaling, according to their calculations, $470,000. They were giving me 30 days to respond before they pursued legal action. I put the letter on my counter and stood there for a long time. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just trying to locate somewhere in my memory any version of my parents that made this make sense. I couldn't find one. I called my best friend. We've known each other since college, and I read her the letter out loud. She was silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. "They hired an attorney," she finally said. "Yes. To sue you for being born. Apparently." She said a word I won't repeat here, and honestly, it was the most accurate response anyone gave me for weeks. I didn't call my parents. Not right away. I needed to know what I was dealing with, so I called a lawyer first. A real one. A civil litigation attorney in Denver who had been recommended to me by a client. I sent her the letter that evening and had a phone call the next morning. She was calm in the way that good lawyers are calm, not dismissive, just measured. She explained that in the United States, parents have a legal obligation to support their minor children, and that obligation does not create a debt the child must repay. There is no legal mechanism by which a parent can sue an adult child for the cost of raising them. The letter, she said, was almost certainly a scare tactic, probably intended to make me panic and write a check just to make it stop. "So they can't actually do anything," I said. "They can file a lawsuit," she said. "A court would likely dismiss it. But it would cost you time and legal fees to get there." I asked her to look at the letter more carefully and tell me if anything else stood out. She was quiet for a moment, reading. Then she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you know if your parents have filed joint tax returns in the last 3 years?" I said I didn't know. She said she wanted me to pull together any financial documents I had, anything I'd ever co-signed, any accounts where my name appeared, anything linking me financially to my family. I told her I'd never co-signed anything for them. I'd been very careful about that. "Okay," she said, "but I want you to check your credit report tonight." I almost didn't. I was exhausted, and part of me wanted to pretend the letter didn't exist for one more day. But I checked. There was a personal loan on my credit reports that I had never taken out, opened 18 months ago. Balance of $47,000. The lender was a credit union in Ohio. My name was listed as a co-borrower. I sat on the floor of my home office and stared at my laptop screen for a long time. I called my attorney back the next morning and told her what I found. "I need you to think carefully," she said. "Did you ever sign anything for your parents? Any document, even something that seemed routine?" I thought back. 2 years ago, I had visited for Christmas, one of the last times I stayed at the house overnight. My dad had asked me to sign some paperwork he said was related to updating their home insurance policy. I was exhausted from the flight. I signed where he pointed without reading carefully. I told my attorney this. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I think we need to talk about a few different things." What my parents had done, allegedly, at that point, was use my signature on a loan application to list me as a co-borrower on a $47,000 personal loan that my brother used to pay his debts. The loan was in my name as much as theirs. If they defaulted, the lender could come after me. The loan had already been delinquent for 60 days. I found that out when I called the credit union directly. The demand letter, my attorney believed, was a pressure tactic designed to make me feel like I owed them money. Money they hoped I would pay in a lump sum that would conveniently cover the loan they'd taken in my name. If I paid them, they could pay off the loan and I would never have been the wiser. I want to be honest about what I felt when I understood this fully. I didn't feel betrayal exactly, because betrayal implies I expected more from them. What I felt was a cold, clarifying anger. The kind that doesn't make you shake. The kind that makes you very, very still. I told my attorney I wanted to pursue every legal option available to me. The first thing she did was send a cease and desist to their attorney. We made clear that I had no legal obligation to reimburse my parents for child-rearing costs, that the demand letter was legally baseless, and that if they filed a lawsuit, I would countersue. We also made clear that I was aware of the unauthorized loan. Their attorney stopped responding within a week. Meanwhile, I filed a dispute with a credit union. I submitted a written statement explaining that I had not knowingly or willingly applied for or agreed to be a co-borrower on this loan, and that I believed my signature had been obtained under false pretenses. I hired a forensic document examiner to look at the original paperwork. She confirmed that the document I had been asked to sign at Christmas had been attached to additional pages I had not seen. This was fraud. Specifically, it was loan fraud involving a federally regulated financial institution. My attorney filed a police report on my behalf in Ohio. She also contacted the credit union's fraud department directly. What happened next was not something I engineered or planned. I want to be clear about that. I didn't go looking to burn everything down. I went looking to protect myself. But when you start pulling at a thread and the whole sweater unravels, that isn't your fault. The fraud investigation prompted the credit union to audit the loan file. During that audit, they flagged inconsistencies that led them to report the application to their compliance department. Because the loan amount exceeded a certain threshold, it triggered a report to federal regulators. And somewhere in that process, I still don't know exactly how, it came out that my parents had claimed my brother as a dependent on their taxes for 2 of the 3 years he was an adult living in Boston on their dime. He was 28. He had not been a dependent, but claiming him had given them a significant tax benefit they were not entitled to. The IRS opened an inquiry. I did not report them to the IRS. I want to say that clearly. I reported the loan fraud. What came out of that investigation was separate from anything I initiated. But I also will not pretend I felt sorry when my attorney called me to tell me what was happening. My parents had been operating as though no one was watching and no one would ever check. They had spent decades managing their family the same way, making choices that benefited them, obscuring the cost, trusting that everyone around them was too dependent or too afraid to push back. They miscalculated with me. Their attorney reached out again in month 3. The tone of this letter was very different from the first. They wanted to discuss resolution. My attorney responded with a list of what resolution would look like from my side. Removal of my name from the loan. The credit union was already handling this. Reimbursement of my legal fees. And a signed agreement that they would make no further legal claims against me. They signed. I don't know the full scope of what the IRS inquiry uncovered. That isn't my case. But I know my parents spent a significant amount of money on tax attorneys, and I know they had to pay back taxes and penalties. I heard this from my mom's sister, who called me once, not to take sides, just to say she was sorry things had gotten to this point. I told her I was sorry too. I meant it. I was sorry it had taken this long for anyone to see clearly what was happening. My brother called me in month 4. I didn't expect that. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, and honestly, our relationship before that was surface level at best. He called from a number I didn't recognize, and when I picked up and heard his voice, I almost hung up. He didn't apologize exactly. He said he hadn't known about the loan. I don't know if that's true. I told him I hoped it was, because if it was true, then he had also been used by them, just in a different direction. He didn't say anything to that. I haven't spoken to my parents since the cease and desist. They have not tried to contact me directly, which I think tells me everything about the nature of our relationship. People who genuinely love you don't go quiet when they lose leverage. There's something people always want to know when they hear a story like this. They want to know if I feel guilty. They want to know if some part of me wishes I had just written a check and kept the peace. No, not for a single moment. Here's what I know. I was born into a family that saw me as a resource. When I was self-sufficient, they ignored me. When I was successful, they tried to extract from me. That is not love. That is not family. That is something else entirely, and I spent too many years being polite about it. I built my life from scratch, in a city where no one knew my name, doing work I taught myself to do, with no safety net and no help and no one in my corner who shared my last name. I paid every bill on time. I showed up every day. I never asked them for anything because I learned early that asking only reminded them of how little they wanted to give. The condo I bought is in a neighborhood with wide sidewalks and a coffee shop on the corner that knows my order. My business has 3 full-time contractors now and more work than I can take on alone. I have a dog I named him something embarrassing that I won't put on the internet, and he sleeps at the foot of my bed and has no idea that any of this happened. That is my life. I built it, every inch of it. My parents did not destroy me. They tried and they failed, and then they destroyed themselves with the same logic they had applied to everything that other people existed to absorb their costs. I don't carry anger anymore most days. What I carry is clarity. I know exactly what I owe the people in my life, and I know exactly what I don't. That knowledge is worth more than the $470,000 they said I owed them. I'll keep it. I think about the Christmas I signed that paperwork, how tired I was from the flight, how I didn't read it, how my dad pointed to the line and I just signed. I replayed that moment more times than I'd like to admit, not with guilt exactly, but with the particular ache of recognizing how well they knew me. They knew I wouldn't make a scene. They knew I was too exhausted to ask questions. They had been counting on that quietness my entire life, and one more time, they used it. That's the part that took the longest to sit with. What happened to my parents wasn't something I caused. It was the natural end of a way of living. One where other people are resources, where a child is an asset to be leveraged, where love is transactional and silence is consent. They made those choices over decades. Every time they looked past me to pour everything into my brother, Every time they accepted my distance as confirmation that I didn't need anything from them. Every time they decided that need, not effort, was what earned care. The consequences that found them were simply the math of all those decisions catching up at once. I used to wonder if I should feel something warmer toward them. Some people hear the story and ask if I've considered that they were just scared. Scared about my brother, scared about money, scared in the way that makes people do ugly things. And maybe that's true, but fear doesn't forge someone's signature. Fear doesn't draft a legal letter demanding reimbursement for diapers and school supplies. That takes a specific kind of reasoning, one that says she won't fight back hard enough to matter. They miscalculated. What got me through wasn't rage. Rage burns fast and leaves you hollow. What carried me was something steadier, the same thing that had carried me through teaching myself to code at 19, through the first contract I almost lost, through every year I built without a net. It was the refusal to accept a story someone else had written about what I was worth and what I owed. I had been rewriting that story since I was old enough to open a laptop and figure things out alone. When they came for me legally, I just kept doing what I had always done. I gathered information, I found the right people, I made decisions from clarity instead of fear, and I did not flinch. My attorney told me early on that the people who survive these situations are the ones who document everything and feel nothing in the moment. I'm not sure I felt nothing, but I had spent so many years learning to act on what I knew rather than what I wished were true that the skill transferred. There's something I want to say to anyone who grew up being the invisible one, the one who figured it out alone while someone else got the applause. Your self-sufficiency is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you need less love. It is what you built because you had to, and it is yours. Nobody gets to hand you an invoice for it. I carried my parents' idea of me for a long time without realizing how heavy it was. The day I stopped wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no moment of cinematic resolution. There was just a letter on my kitchen counter, a decision to call a lawyer, and a slow, methodical dismantling of every assumption they had ever made about how far I would go to keep the peace. Turns out I would go exactly as far as I needed to, not one step further, not one step less.